There's this kind of idea that you hear a lot in the States that kind of is then on social media that like the UK is literally a no-go zone. Like there's aspects of Britain, there's places that you just cannot go. You're just going to get stabbed.
This feels unprecedented. This feels bold. This feels radical. It feels enormous. Like when I saw that statement, I was actually really shocked. Who on earth has got over 30 grand to, do you know what I mean? Like pay a yoga teacher. And respectfully, I mean, how many times was he using that teacher?
Doing yoga. I know. I was actually surprised that he was into yoga.
You're
Honestly,
like
that
a
was the most
yoga
surprising thing of the whole
enthusiast,
story
what?
for me. I was like, wow, Prince Andrew likes yoga. Hello and welcome back to Untangled with me, Ben Zand.
Yes, and me, Stacey Dooley. Each week we will be untangling some of the week's most interesting stories and the biggest headlines, trying to make sense of what is going on in the world at the moment.
It's been yet another busy week in the news cycle. So what is on the agenda today, Stacey?
Well, off the back of, this weekend's events, that unfolded over on the Saturday night. There was the Cambridgeshire train attack that left 11 people hospitalised. We'll be discussing the issue of knife crime here in the UK.
Yeah, that was a horrific event, which we'll be getting into. In addition to that today, so we're also going to be untangling yet again, because it's a story that never ends. The topic of Prince Andrew, or should I now say Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, because that's what he's now known since King Charles removed his royal titles. So we're going to be dissecting whether this is the beginning of the end for the royal family, which is quite a question.
Yeah, it's been really interesting the last couple of weeks how that's all played out. And remember, as always, you can email us with any thoughts, any suggestions, anything that we've discussed. It's untangled@zand.land. We'd love to hear from you. So this story has, completely dominated headlines since it happened, unsurprisingly, just because of how horrific it was. It was so shocking. To summarise, it happened on a train travelling from Doncaster down to London's King's Cross. There was a British man, armed with a knife, just, this violent rampage going through these carriages, injuring 11 people. Some of them were critically injured. Thank God now they're in a stable condition. There was a train worker who, tried to step in very heroically, tried to save as many people as he could, strangers to him, essentially. Since then, they have charged this 32-year-old man, Anthony Williams, 10 counts of attempted murder, plus another charge of attempted murder and possession of a bladed weapon. That was for an earlier incident in London. And detectives are now saying, actually, we need to look into whether or not he might also be connected to stabbing a 14-year-old and 2 other knife attacks the same weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose there's a few things to this. One is there's a kind of really positive aspect in the sense of, there's people who really stepped in and tried to kind of do something to stop it. There's the train worker who stepped in, who's now in a critical condition, but a stable condition.
But stable, yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge relief that as of this moment, no one has died as a consequence of that attack. But I think, on the flip side, it's obviously created major fear for a lot of people because of that sense of, who hasn't taken like a train, like an LNER train up and down the country. It's a place that you kind of have to come into contact with a lot of people you don't know, and that kind of sense of fear and anxiety that maybe one of those people could be carrying a knife, maybe they could be unhinged and they do something like this. And I first came across it because there was actually a producer from our team who was on the train just before it, and he texted saying, my train's been held up because supposedly, there's a major incident happening on the train in front of me. And then shortly after that, this story came out, obviously about kind of a knife attack on the train, and your brain goes into immediately, oh my God, where's this going to end? You start to think about a carriage and just how compact it is, and everyone's been in that scenario. So I guess I can totally understand the fear. I guess what we're trying to untangle today is that kind of fear and panic around knife crime. Does it reflect the reality of how bad knife crime is in the country right now? And how should you respond after an instance like this happens? Because obviously everyone immediately looks at it, you feel terror because you're like, I don't want this to happen anymore. But do the stats back up this sense that Britain is in kind of a major knife crime crisis? Yeah.
There've been loads of sort of strong reactions online, haven't there? And some of the politicians come forward and they've said, we need to think about maybe more stop and searches. The Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, he come out and sort of echoed those ideas. I don't know if that would give people more comfort. I don't know if people would feel safer if that was the kind of operation that they were thinking about introducing. It's hard, isn't it? Because on the one hand, the fact that kind of scenes like this are playing out is utterly terrifying. But then you also sort of don't want to start scaremongering, and you don't sort of want to start speculating about, you sort of need to sort of try and stay like, whatever's introduced, it needs to be proportionate, doesn't it? And you have to try and make sure that we don't get sort of too emotional, and that emotion doesn't turn into a hysteria. And I totally accept that actually there is a persistent problem with knife crime here in the UK. That is entirely true. And I've met individuals, family members who have lost young people to knife crime. Like, I totally accept it's something that we need to get to grips with. But it's like, if your solution sort of focused, what do those solutions realistically need to look like?
Yeah, you start to look at some of the stats on this. So like knife homicides are down almost 20% in England and Wales over the past year. Overall knife crime is down 5%, which is the first fall in 4 years. And hospital admissions for knife assaults are down 10%. And I think, it's interesting.
But that's only the last year, right?
It is the last year. And that's the thing, but if you look at the bigger picture, knife crime has increased over the last 10 years. So there's been a 64% increase in police recorded offences involving a knife or a sharp instrument in the last 10 years. So there's kind of like some positivity in the last year. But if you look over the last decade, this is a problem.
I mean, I'm looking at some of the stats here. 66% of London adults say they were worried about the possibility of being a victim of knife crime. That was the latest London Council's survey of Londoners. And apparently it's even more of a concern for young people. 83% of people aged 16 to 24, England and Wales, were concerned about the levels of youth violence. Obviously, that includes knife crime. So whilst it has gone down over the last year or so, I think it would be irresponsible of us to suggest that this isn't a persistent problem.
I think it's interesting. I'm in the US at the moment, and I'm doing a story about guns, and I was in a gun store yesterday. And there's this kind of idea that you hear a lot in the States that kind of is then on social media that like the UK is literally a no-go zone. Like there's aspects of Britain, there's places that you just cannot go. You're just going to get stabbed, and like it's so incredibly dangerous. And it's fascinating because like I literally was having this argument yesterday with a bunch of people in this gun store because they were basically trying to convince me that like the UK is so dangerous for knives because we don't have guns. But if you look at it and say, if that man on that train had like an AR-15 semi-automatic weapon, that would have been absolute chaos. You know what I mean? It would have been a complete massacre. And the kind of UK homicide rate is kind of lower than a lot of kind of comparable countries. It's significantly lower than the US. I think it's like 7 times lower. It's lower than places like France and Sweden. So I guess the problem is like, how bad is the situation? How much do we need to kind of panic after an event like this? I guess, there was like the Shadow Home Secretary was on the radio this morning and he was calling for more stop and search. Do you want to start making those decisions after one event? When stop and search is already so controversial, it's been proven to kind of target young black men significantly more than they target anybody else.
Yeah. Of course, I've had similar conversations with Americans. I was in a gun shop in Arkansas, and it was very, very similar. It was like, I can't believe you walk around London without a gun. I cannot believe that. Like that's one of the reasons that I would never visit the UK, because I wouldn't be able to walk down Oxford Street without having a gun. Like I would feel like I didn't have my arm. Like, it's so entrenched. It's so like the Second Amendment. Like they're so some Americans are so obsessed with carrying a firearm at all times. They cannot comprehend that you'd leave the house without one. And then they're sort of fed this narrative, aren't they, that London is this like sort of lawless, like it's kind of like the wild, wild west.
But yeah, exactly. And I think it's part of the kind of it's the argument for guns, isn't it? Because their sensibility is, well, if you take away guns, what happens is people replace that with knives, which isn't true, and the stats just don't match it up. And I think, another stat that is worth referencing is like London reported last year the lowest number of homicides for under 25s for more than 2 decades. So like overall, murders are at a 5-year low. The rate is much lower than other international cities like New York, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Madrid, according to Sadiq Khan's office. And a place like the US has like a higher per capita homicide rate for both firearms. And interestingly, even knives compared to the UK. So there are like positive stories within this, but I think it's hard to have that conversation in truth. Even I was like kind of cautious about wanting to even have the conversation on the podcast, because it's hard to have the chat after there's just been an incident on a train.
Of course.
Multiple people have been stabbed.
When something like this happens, like understandably so, like people are so emotional and it's terrifying, and people want solutions. They want solutions from the government. They want solutions from official figures, because they can't bear the idea of this ever happening again. But you've sort of just spoke about those stats over the last year, and that does feel like there is reason to be cautiously optimistic. And no one is disputing for 1 second, like we totally understand and we totally accept that there is a knife problem. There is a knife problem. There is a crisis in the UK. But I suppose you have to kind of look at it comparatively. And it's, when you look at other countries and other cities, it's, the idea that we've been told that London has these no-go zones and these no-go areas is entirely untrue.
Yeah, and I guess not make kind of political decisions off the back of kind of increased emotions just after an event happens, and look at it more rationally.
Some of the...
Or social media commentary.
Social media commentators, it's like, respectfully, some of them aren't even privy to, the facts and figures and the stats that, the government and, Sadiq's office and, all the rest of it, that they'll be taking that into consideration. And, you just hope that going forward, there will be things put in place, there'll be measures put in place that means we never find ourselves in this kind of situation again.
So let's get on to our next topic, which is, big question. Is this the beginning of the end for the royals? So this is something that we've covered on our first ever episode of Untangled, which was just a couple of weeks ago. And that was all when it was kicking off that Andrew was giving up his title of Duke and his other honours voluntarily. There are a lot of people at that point that felt that did not go far enough. And since then, the story has only got juicier. So now he is no longer a prince. So it's official. King Charles has made him simply Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. So
still a mouthful.
I guess it is. And also, I guess he basically is just like us now. Does that mean he is just on?
Listen, he's just an ordinary civilian.
So for the first time, the palace has expressed their thoughts and utmost sympathies for the victims and survivors of abuse, which a lot of people have kind of read into very deeply. Or like, there's a suggestion that this means that the king is acknowledging that Andrew's done something wrong here, and it's a big shift in tone for the royal family. So do we think this is them picking a side in all this? Are they kind of saying, look, we acknowledge that Prince Andrew has done something terrible, and this is the consequence?
This feels unprecedented. This feels bold. This feels radical. It feels enormous. Like when I saw that statement, I was actually really shocked. I couldn't quite believe that they had been as explicit as they had. Do you know what I mean? It's essentially them going, we want to distance ourselves completely from Andrew, not Prince Andrew. We want to distance ourselves completely. We hear what people on the ground are saying. We understand your frustrations. We want to sort of try and protect the monarchy.
I think the public's been way ahead of the royal family on this for quite a long time. There's been kind of a lot of stink around Prince Andrew. So for me, it's like, how has it taken this long? But now it does then open a whole kind of worms as to what the potential next steps are with it. He's no longer a member of the royal family in the same way. So him losing his titles is unprecedented in modern royal history. So like no child of a reigning monarch has previously been formally stripped of the prince title. When we were talking about this 2 weeks ago, this felt like
yes, that's what I'm saying.
Impossible.
Yeah.
So there was like a degree of like perceived immunity and legal protection around Andrew because of that, because you were like, there's no way that they could do something to a member of the royal family. Now that's gone. What happens next? Could Andrew have to go to the US to answer questions on the Jeffrey Epstein case if he's asked to by federal authorities? There's currently no active criminal case that would lead to do that. And he strenuously denies all of these allegations. But people, some people are now calling for a kind of serious level of justice, including Virginia Giuffre's brother.
Yeah.
So it does now just feel like it's heating up for him specifically. And like, what does he do?
I suppose he's just thinking, even the last sort of fortnight, like his life has been turned upside down and back to front. And I'm not suggesting that, he should be afforded any level of sympathy. I'm not saying that, but it's kind of even like his accommodation, like we were talking about in the first episode, weren't we? He was living in this 30-room mansion, and there was this ironclad clause that meant that he could never be thrown out. And actually so much has changed. Like he's no longer going to be living there. Like Sarah Ferguson, she's going to have to sort of sort herself out. And the king is saying that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is going to be living elsewhere, and it's not going to be at the public's expense. We're not going to be paying for it. King Charles will be looking after that sort of privately. I mean, you could then argue the question.
But even that is confusing. Trying to because like looking into the financials.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a topic that we'd love to hear from the listeners. People love to talk about this. So like, any thoughts on this one, please leave a comment below or email untangled@zand.land. But I think that the financials of this is like, Andrew's being given notice to surrender his lease on the lodge. He was only paying a peppercorn. We spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. And he's expected to relocate to private accommodation on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk as soon as practicable. And that's the kind of royal family's huge private country retreat. And King Charles is supposedly paying for it.
And also, they're sort of saying like, oh, he's going to be in this cottage now. Actually, don't associate, sort of, and in your mind, you're thinking of like a little cottage, in the middle of nowhere. It's probably more like a villa. Do you know what I mean?
Like, yeah.
It's not like he's going to be like living in cramped conditions. But what I'm saying is, it is remarkable how much has changed over the last 2 weeks. Like, unbelievable, truly.
Yeah, and I guess, there's so many questions that come off the back of this, but like a little bit more on the money, just because for me that's fascinating. But like, so they've not specified any formal income or allowance for Andrew going forward, but it's been reported that the king may approve a one-off 6-figure payment, and it's prepared to personally pay an annual stipend, a fixed amount of money that kind of covers his living costs and basic expenses, which is intended to prevent him from overspending in his new life as a commoner. However, nothing's been confirmed. But it's like, why does he get that? Like, and on the one hand, I get it, because it's like they probably don't, like, it's not good optically either for the royal family if he's like living destitute and he's like homeless in the streets of London.
He was always known as one of the more extravagant spenders in the royal families. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was always what he was known for. I think, there was that reference, wasn't there? It was like, he had this yoga teacher or whatever that was costing him like 32 grand a year. You know what I mean? Just like, things that like ordinary hardworking people, like, who on earth has got over 30 grand to, do you know what I mean? Like, pay a yoga teacher. And respectfully, I mean, how many times was he using that teacher?
Doing yoga. I know. I was actually surprised that he was into yoga.
You're
Honestly,
like
that was the most surprising thing of the whole story for me.
I know.
I was like, wow, Prince Andrew likes yoga.
I think he's always been very big time. Do you know what I mean? Like, he has always loved the lavish lifestyle that he has been afforded for so long.
So I guess the question now is, where does that leave the royal family? I think like kind of public perception of the monarchy, kind of according to a recent YouGov poll, which was done a year into King Charles' reign. So like a 77% of over 65s still believe the monarchy is good for Britain. But only 30% of 18 to 24-year-olds feel the same. If you go back to 2012, 73% of the general public said the kind of monarchy was good for Britain. Where do you think this leaves it now? Like, kind of how do you feel about the royal family after this saga?
I mean, when you sort of reference 2012, I mean, 2012 feels like a lifetime ago. Like, everyone was just brimming with optimism, weren't they? It was like 2012 feels like it was 100 years ago.
Is that like around the Olympics?
Yeah, like we're all British and everyone, we're all celebratory, and this all feels wonderful. I actually remember I was in America, I was in a prison.
Yeah, I still had hope in 2012.
Yeah, everyone was hopeful in 2012. I was in America in 2012, and I remember, and we was in this bar or whatever, making a film in a prison, and I just felt sort of so smug that I was British, because there was this sense of pride, there was this sense of unity. It was like everyone was in great spirits. But I feel like, the kind of stats that you just alluded to there was like, this is not particularly surprising. The older generation feel like the monarchy are, sort of hold value, and the younger crowd, millennials, Gen Z, they feel like actually there's no relatability there whatsoever. And the old age argument has always been, but, think about what they do for tourism and think about how much money they bring in. But it's like, you've also then got to think about how much money they cost us.
Yeah.
I mean, there's never really been like absolute clarity surrounding, money and the monarchy and costs and stuff. But we do know that the monarchy costs taxpayers around 132 million a year. But then there are other people, Republican researchers, for example, say it's rumoured to be much higher when you factor in things like security. That then means it's closer to the 500 million mark. So I think it's perfectly legitimate. It's a perfectly valid question. It's like, what do the monarchy, what do they really offer us day to day?
It's also the downside of stories like this of Prince Andrew, because what they don't even want people to be having this conversation around whether they're kind of
relevant,
their relevancy, and whether they should kind of continue to exist, because there's arguments for and against it, and they kind of reflect the national mood, exactly as you just said. Like during the Olympics, everything's really nice and happy, and you feel proud to be British. It's like, great. I also love the monarchy, and when I'm in the States right now, when you're in the US, and that's the thing, everyone kind of correlates with the UK. It's like the royals, they freaking love the royals. But it is undeniably outdated. The royals own the Duchy of Cornwall and Lancaster, which are private estates that generate millions of pounds a year for them personally. They can do things like, they don't do this often, but they could block or alter major infrastructure projects across these lands because they control huge amounts of kind of land in Britain. There's also hidden elements to the monarchy, which, it's unknown how much their private estates generate an income. It's unknown as to whether they have offshore trusts and investments.
Why do we accept that? Like, collectively, why do we accept that? Like, why is that just, it's always been that way, so that's just how it is. It's like, it is interesting that we place so much emphasis, like we want to be across everything, and we feel entitled, quite rightly, to, some things we're sort of like, some things are non-negotiable. We're like, no, we need to know, like, absolutely, we need to know where our money's going. But then when it comes to the monarchy, like, it's always been so vague, and it's, we've never really been.
I also think the alternative would be so complicated. You know what I mean? It's like, because what is the alternative? So we'd need to we'd become a republic. We'd abolish the monarchy and replace the king with an elected head of state, which would maybe be a president. It wouldn't mean a US style president with loads of power. It would mean a kind of ceremonial president, but that would be kind of changing the whole structure of how Britain operates. So I think there was a 2025 study by Ipsos where 2 in 5 Britons thought that abolishing the monarchy would be worse for the country. 21% thought it'd be better, and 29% thought it'd see no difference. So I think there's just not the public appetite really, because it's such a major move for a country where this has just become our way of life, and it's so intrinsically linked with the sense of Britishness. It's all kind of like a gossip fodder as well, isn't it? We love talking about the
Totally.
It's like Coronation Street.
I just can't imagine any of this playing out in my lifetime. Like, I'm not saying it will, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying it will never happen, but I just can't, the immediate future, certainly not. Within my lifetime, I can't imagine it.
It's, of course, worth saying Andrew strenuously denies all of the allegations against him. But yes, he's no longer Prince Andrew. But there you go. All right. Well, we've got to wrap all this for today. So,
my God, yeah.
Of course, we'll be back next Wednesday with another episode on Spotify and YouTube. And if you've enjoyed the show, why not share it with someone that you think will like it and enjoy hearing us chat?
Brilliant. Ben, I've had a lovely little conversation with you. It's morning for you. It's sort of afternoon for me.
Yeah, it's about 6 a.m. I'm filming all day out, which will be fun until really late. But,
Atlanta's fun. I've been to Atlanta.
Atlanta is cool. Yeah, it's really nice. And I will survive. When I'm on shoots, I literally just have 27,000 cups of kind of horrible American coffee.
I met Andre 3000 in Atlanta in a car park.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
wow.
Cool, innit? Yeah, it was a couple of years ago.
I actually think an even crazier story. I met the guy who sung, "I was gonna clean my room, but then I got high."
Oh, yeah, guy? I do remember that. Man. Yeah, I do remember that. Because, yeah.
Because Atlanta is the hub of kind of rap music, and kind of it's a proper cool place.
And listen, if you're enjoying what it is that we've got to say, if you're not enjoying whatever, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. You can give us a like, you can leave us a comment or a glowing review. You choose. It's up to you, whatever suits.
And to the people listening, if you want to go one step further after listening, you know, as we said at the start of the show, you can always email untangled@zand.land. We'd love to hear about you, hear any questions you have, chat about what we've talked about this week. But yeah, tune in next week.
Sounds good. Bye, gang. See ya. Ciao for now.